In 1905, he reached Oklahoma City and met a 15-year-old singer who came to an audition and ended up marrying him. Cleaver Creighton wanted to become a dancer, but couldn't dance, and Chaney did his best to teach her. They went on tour together.
Old Hollywood didn't just sell romance, it manufactured it. But look at the numbers: 57 and 41, 49 and 19, 33 and 17, 81 and 35, 72 and 36. This isn't gossip, it's power, and the damage that followed. 10 stories. One question: how many of these love stories were really love? And how many were control? And who actually got to say no?
Because of his flamboyant lifestyle and male friends, there have been questions about his sexual preferences.
We're living in such a permissive world that I don't think anybody really much cares whatever anybody does behind closed doors. It's not shocking anymore.
1. Walter Wanger and Joan Bennett, 57 and 41, and then he shot her agent. This reads like noir, not because it's stylized, but because it's the kind of scandal the industry could never fully contain. Walter Wanger was a heavyweight producer. Joan Bennett was a major actress. Jennings Lang wasn't a random third wheel. He was Bennett's agent, a powerful operator in his own right. In late 1951, Wanger became convinced something was happening behind his back. Many accounts describe him hiring a private investigator and spiraling into suspicion, watching, stewing, and turning jealousy into certainty. Then he confronted them. On December 13, 1951, in Beverly Hills, Wanger approached as Bennett and Lang returned to a car. In the encounter that followed, he shot Lang, wounding him and sending him to the hospital. The press devoured the story, and the framing is the part that still stings. Because the narrative quickly stopped being a serious act of violence in public and turned into a morality play, Wanger was often treated as a husband pushed too far, while Bennett became the face people judged, dissected, and blamed. In court, Wanger received what many sources summarize as a relatively short sentence served in a minimum security county facility, a punishment that became part of the legend. And then the industry did what it does. It absorbed the scandal and kept moving. Wanger continued working, later producing a prison film that many observers read as him processing the fallout on screen. A powerful man committed a public act that could have ended his career, and didn't. The woman at the center became the symbol people argued about. That imbalance is not a footnote. That is the point. 2. William Desmond Taylor and Mary Miles Minter, 49 and 19. If you want the moment Hollywood learned it could look like a crime scene, start here. William Desmond Taylor wasn't only a director, he was a fixer, a respected authority figure, the kind of man who could open doors for young actresses, or quietly close them. Mary Miles Minter, meanwhile, was a teen star marketed as purity itself, the sweet-faced good girl of the era, which is exactly why the story that formed around her was so combustible. In early 1922, Taylor was found dead in his bungalow. At first, some accounts described confusion and soft-pedaled details. Then the truth set in. It was a shooting, and the scene had the messy fingerprints of private life. The press swarmed. A national obsession was born. Minter's connection became gasoline. Contemporary reporting and later retellings describe letters linked to her being found in Taylor's home, some treated in newspapers like scandal confessions. But biographers have also argued about timelines, context, and what those letters did or didn't prove. That dispute never stopped the public machine. And the orbit around Minter was just as dark. Her mother, Charlotte Shelby, is repeatedly described in sources as fiercely controlling. And the rumor ecosystem around the case turned a teenager into a symbol people used to project whatever they wanted to believe about ambition, sex, and how a girl gets ahead. Here's the structural horror. Even when parts are contested, the public story hardened fast. Teen star plus older power figure plus murder equals sign permanent stain. The case never truly closed, and Hollywood never truly forgot it, because it exposed the industry's soft underbelly. Glamour outside, rot inside. 3. Gloria Grahame and Anthony Ray, 37 and 23, and he was her former stepson. This case isn't just age gap, it's taboo, the kind Hollywood could never package into a clean narrative. Gloria Grahame was an Academy Award winner, a noir icon. Anthony Tony Ray was the son of her former husband, director Nicholas Ray, meaning, in plain English, her former stepson. Years after her marriage to Nicholas ended, she and Tony began a relationship, and in 1960 they married in Tijuana, Mexico. What makes the story especially combustible is the delayed detonation. The marriage was kept quiet at first, but when it surfaced publicly in 1962, it hit like a wrecking ball. Biographies and summaries describe reputational damage and career turbulence, not because Hollywood had moral purity, but because Hollywood depends on image control. This story shattered the image. Then came the leverage war. Her ex-husband, Cy Howard, attempted to gain sole custody of their daughter, arguing that Grahame was unfit. The scandal became ammunition, in court and in public perception. Some accounts also describe intense stress and subsequent mental health treatment. It's important not to oversimplify after into because, but it's equally impossible to deny the brutality of the public punishment once the secret became visible. In Hollywood, image is capital. This story burned capital to ash. 4. John Derek and Bo Derek, 46 and 16, met, married at 19 and 49. If you want the cleanest where does romance end and control begin example, this one keeps resurfacing for a reason. According to widely cited biographies and interviews, Bo Derek met John Derek when she was 16, and he was in his mid-40s. Already established, already connected, already a man who understood how to shape an image. This wasn't just an age gap, it was an imbalance in experience, money, and professional leverage from the first day. Over time, John became the architect of Bo's public identity, director, manager, gatekeeper, the person who decided what the world would see and how it would see it. That's why the story often reads less like a romance and more like a long, slow takeover where brand and relationship fuse into one thing. Some later accounts add another layer to the timeline. They describe the couple spending extended stretches outside the U.S. while she was still underage, with the relationship's early years unfolding largely away from the American spotlight. Years later, they married when she was 19 and he was 49. Even if you strip away every moral judgment and leave only the sequence of ages and milestones, it still lands like a hammer. Met at 16 changes how audiences hear every later claim of agency, because the starting point was never equal. 5. Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal, 46 and 21, met. This is one of Hollywood's oldest structures, the icon and the newcomer, the married legend and the young woman still becoming herself. Patricia Neal was 21 when she met Gary Cooper, then 46, already a towering star with a carefully protected image. Their affair became one of the era's most discussed open secrets. And here's where the power math shows up. Cooper could keep his public stature intact. Neal absorbed the private costs. In accounts tied to Neal's autobiography and later summaries, she described becoming pregnant and having an abortion arranged under pressure connected to the situation. Other retellings connect the affair to emotional fallout significant enough that she sought therapy. And the dynamic gets darker in some later claims, including Neal's allegation that Cooper hit her after she went on a date with another actor. Meanwhile, Cooper's wife confronted the rumors. Reports describe a separation, but he did not divorce. The older star's life remained anchored. The younger partner absorbed the instability. That's why it still feels modern. Not because it's shocking, but because the risk was never shared equally. 6. Marvin Gaye and Janice Hunter, 33 and 17, and he was still married. This story is a collision. Legend versus teenager, intimacy versus imbalance, with one extra complication that changes the moral math immediately. He wasn't even free. Biographical timelines commonly describe Marvin Gaye meeting 17-year-old Janice Hunter in March 1973 during the Let's Get It On era while he was still married to his first wife, Anna Gordy. Accounts say Hunter wasn't simply someone around. She became a presence that shaped his emotional world and the way people later read his music. And then it moved fast. They lived together. Their first child, Nona, was born in 1974. Their son Frankie followed in 1975. In 1977, they married, a formal step that, for some observers, doesn't clean up the ethical questions so much as freeze them in place. He was a fully formed star in his 30s. She entered the story as a teenager. Retellings also underline volatility, fame pressure, money, emotional instability, and the basic imbalance of who had power at the starting line. People like to reduce this to numbers, but the real issue is structural. A teenager's life got pulled into an adult world at full speed, and then everyone expected her to survive it like a grown woman. The age gap is shocking. The pace is worse. 7. Liberace and Scott Thorson, late 50s and late teens. Liberace wasn't just a performer. He was a privately run empire. Money, staff, control, and an image guarded like a state secret. Scott Thorson entered that world as a teenager. Exact ages vary by account, but what stays consistent is the life stage mismatch. Thorson was in his late teens, while Liberace was in his late 50s, already rich, famous, and accustomed to managing people the way other stars manage costumes. This relationship became public not just through gossip, but through litigation, which is why it reads like a modern celebrity scandal, not an old Hollywood whisper. In 1982, Thorson sued Liberace, describing himself not only as a romantic partner, but also as an employee-like figure. Chauffeur, travel aide, caretaker, someone whose life was absorbed into the star's machine. The lawsuit included claims of promises, support, money, homes, lifelong care. Liberace denied key parts, still fighting to preserve the public persona. The case dragged on and generated headlines because it forced the private structure into daylight. Dependency, secrecy, and a younger partner with little leverage once the relationship ended. It ultimately settled out of court in 1986, with Thorson receiving cash and additional property. The public lesson was blunt. An empire can pay to make the mess quieter, but it can't erase the power dynamic that created the mess in the first place. 8. Bela Lugosi and Hope Lininger, 72 and 36. Marriage in 1955. By the 1950s, Bela Lugosi was famous and fragile. The Dracula image still followed him, but the real man was battling decline, financial pressure, and a public narrative around addiction that had become part of how people spoke about him. In 1955, Lugosi married Hope Lininger, his fifth wife, a woman more than 3 decades younger, who, according to common biographical summaries, had been a fan and wrote to him while he was in the hospital. One often repeated detail comes straight from those summaries. She signed letters, "A dash of hope," a phrase that sounds like studio dialogue until you realize it's how the relationship entered the record. The marriage drew headlines because it looked like a late-life rescue attempt, an aging icon trying to stabilize. Contemporary reporting from the period described Lugosi openly acknowledging addiction around that time, and the timing matters because he had entered treatment and was trying to rebuild. Accounts also note they discussed divorce, yet remained married until his death in 1956. That's why this story lands more like tragedy than romance. It's not love conquers all, it's fame colliding with vulnerability, and a relationship formed in the final chapter when power looks less like glamour and more like dependency. It isn't a fairy tale, it's an ending. 9. Lon Chaney and Clive Creighton, 22 and 16, and the crisis that ended her career. Yeah, the gap is only 6 years, but the point isn't the number, it's the context. She was 16, and this is a story about power imbalance and consequences, not romance. Lon Chaney became a silent-era myth, the man of 1,000 faces. But the origin story of his private life reads like a warning label. Chaney married Clive Creighton when she was 16 and he was 22. They lived in the grueling world of live performance, where reputation was currency and scandal could end a career overnight. Then came the implosion. On April 30th, 1913, at the Majestic Theater in Los Angeles, where Chaney was working with the Colbin Dill Show, Cleva suffered a severe self-harm crisis that was widely reported at the time. She survived, but survival isn't the same as recovery. Many later retellings describe the aftermath as devastating. Her singing career effectively collapsed, her health was affected, and the scandal ripped through theater circles. The marriage unraveled under pressure that was both private and public. Film historians often point to that episode as a pivot. Theater became hostile. Film, still considered less respectable in some quarters, became an exit route for Chaney. But for Cleva, the consequence landed like a life sentence. Her name became shorthand for tragedy rather than talent. The age gap is only the starting line here. The real shock is how quickly the industry moved on, and how permanently the cost settled on the younger partner. 10. Fred Astaire and Robin Smith, 81 and 35. Not every age gap story reads like a tabloid scandal. Sometimes the scandal is simply the math, and what people assume the math must mean. Fred Astaire was one of the most beloved icons in American entertainment. In 1980, at 81, he married Robin Smith, 35, a successful jockey who broke barriers in her own field. They'd known each other for years before marrying, and still the wedding stunned Hollywood. Period accounts often describe discomfort, disbelief, even family tension. The sense that an icon was supposed to age properly, with a spouse who matched the public image. But here's what complicates easy cynicism. The marriage lasted until Astaire's death in 1987, and Robin later described it as deeply happy. 7 years of bliss in interviews that circulate in summaries of their relationship. Then came the aftershock, not romantic scandal but legal conflict. After his death, Robin became involved in disputes over Astaire's image and footage, part of the broader, very modern war over legacy. Who controls the face, the name, the clips, the meaning? And that's the twist that brings us back to the theme. Sometimes the age gap isn't the headline. The power is. Old Hollywood sold romance like a product, but the product was power. How many of these love stories were truly love? And who actually got to say no?